You Lord, the Lord, you Lord, for Sunday. 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 You Lord, the Lord, you Lord, for Sunday.
All right. Welcome to Frontline Manor. I'm your host, Mr. Durite, Kevin Stewart, if you did not know. And this is going to be the first in a series of episodes talking about the history of Manor. So let me get into my introduction. Tonight on Frontline Manor, we're diving into the rich history of our city with a special guest who knows it better than most. Wayne Schneider is a dedicated local historian and blogger who has spent years uncovering the stories behind Manor's posts. I said posts instead of saying past. I swear I can read. From the life of our town's founder, James B. Manor, to newly discovered information that could reshape what we thought we knew, Wayne has some fascinating insights to share. Get ready for a deep dive into history and maybe even a few surprises along the way. Wayne, welcome to Frontline Manor, sir.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm always glad to talk about Manor history.
All right, yeah. Let's get, but you know what? Before we get into Manor's history, let's get into who is Mr. Wayne Schneider.
Well, my family moved to Manor in 1952.
Okay.
I started Manor schools in the third grade and graduated 10 years later from Manor High School.
Okay.
So I've been here. I haven't been here all that time because when I graduated from high school, I moved into Austin. My parents had bought a house in Austin by then, so I moved into Austin. But I came back. My parents kept their property out here all the time, even though they had moved into Austin. And then I came back out to Manor in 2001 after my
Okay.
father passed away. My mother was still living here by herself. So I moved back out here. My family moved back out here where we are now. So I've actually been a part of Manor since 1952, but just not here all the time.
Okay. And that's interesting. So is Manor High School in the same spot it was back when you?
No,
No.
at that you know where Manor, where Excel Academy is. It's
Yes.
yeah, that's where it was.
Okay. Okay. So we're gonna get that a lot because I don't know nothing about Manor. Period. I've been here 2 years. I don't know nothing, and nobody can sit up here and question if you know anything about Manor. So if anybody sit up here, oh well, who are you? What do you know? What's your qualification? Just tell them to come see me. I'll vouch for you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So let's get into some of this history. So James B. Manor is the namesake of our city. But what do most people not know about him or his family?
Oh, they probably don't know anything about his history before he came here. Anyway,
I found a little bit on Google, but not a lot.
yeah, well, as we said earlier, there's some information out there about him that's not necessarily true,
Okay.
but probably his background before he came to Manor or before he came to Texas. There was no Manor until 1872, but before he came to Texas, most people probably don't know anything about him. But he came. He was born in 1804 in Edgecombe County, North Carolina.
Okay.
And then when he was about 10 years old, his family moved to Rutherford County, Tennessee, and so that's where he lived most of the time from then on until he came to Texas. And he came from a family of 11 children,
Mhm.
and during his lifetime, he had 11 children. Unfortunately, 3 of them died before they reached 5 years old, but he had 8 of them, and all of them were daughters, except for 2 of the others that had already passed away. So all the rest of his children were daughters. So, but he came to Texas. Well, there's a long story there, and I don't know how much you want to get into that when, but
Well, I mean, we have nothing but time and opportunity right now. What, what do you want to get into?
well, he came to. Can I read you a little bit of something
Yeah,
here?
go ahead.
Let me preface that by saying I know of only 4 written histories of Manor,
Okay.
and one of them was written in 1924 by a woman named Blanche Ballerstadt, and she wrote it to be published in the Texas History Teachers Bulletin, which was a publication done by the University of Texas.
Okay.
But her history only goes from 1932 to 1870. I mean, from 1832 to 1872. Her history stops there. She wrote it mainly for study in schools, so kids could learn something about it. There's another history that was written in 1953 by a woman called Thelma Rogers Cook. She was James Manor's great granddaughter.
Okay.
And so she wrote a history in 1953, which is much, much, much longer than the one that Blanche Ballerstadt did. And her original history is at the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, her one she wrote in 53. There is a copy of it online, but it's not exactly the same as the one that she wrote. There is another history that was written in the mid 1960s by a woman called Mrs. Ernest Acklin. She was the president of the Tuesday Book Club of Manor at that time.
Okay.
And so she hand wrote. I've got about 13 pages of handwritten history that she did, and I have that at home. And she did that because it was to be presented to the Tuesday Book Club members, and so that's why she wrote all that out. And that was given to me a while back, and so I still have it. And the only other history I know of, other than those 3, is the one I've written.
Okay.
and it hadn't been. I haven't done anything with it yet. So, but parts of it are considerably different from any of the others. So.
Okay. So you mentioned one of his descendants. Are there any more descendants of Mr. Manor?
They would be very, very far removed if there are.
Okay.
Because, as I said, he only had daughters.
Daughters,
So
correct.
there would be no male descendants of his. There were a number of slaves that took back the name of Manor. You know,
Really?
so there may be some descendants of some of those that are still around. But
Interesting.
no, there's probably not any that anybody would know of right now.
Okay. Huh. That makes me want to do a Google search. Because, I mean, you hear a lot of Jeffersons and Thomases and things like that. You don't hear a lot of black people named Manor.
Well, I was a speaker last year at the Black History Celebration,
Okay.
Manor Black History Celebration last year, and at that time I presented to them a list of at least 50 black people with the last name of Manor.
Really?
Yeah.
Confirmed to be descendants of the slaves?
In one way or another, yes.
Wow. And still in this area or moved
Well, a
on?
lot of them are, a lot of them have passed away, but
Okay.
because I was going back quite a ways to pick up those names.
Okay.
So there may be a few still in this area, but I don't know.
Well, after this show, I'm going to ask you about your tips on how to find that information, because I've been trying to look into my history, and it's very hard to run down history on black people. So I definitely want to get some tips. I just can't go to ancestry.com and get answers. It's just not happening. So that is very interesting that you was able to do that. and commendable. That's really good. you, you got me shook right now. Okay. So my next question is, uh, we've been corresponding. You sent me an email, and you mentioned there was only one known photo of James B. Maynard. How did you come across it, and what's the story behind that one picture?
Well, I don't know where the photo originally came from. I mean, who took it or why, but when I first started looking into Manor history, I went to a lot of different sources there.
Okay.
And one of those was the Austin History Center.
Mhm.
They happen to have several things relating to Manor online that you can look at. They've got a lot more stuff that's not online that you can go down there and look at. But online, they actually have that picture of Manor, of James Manor.
Now, has that picture been verified to actually be him?
Far as I know, it's him. That's everybody uses it, but I don't know how you'd ever verify it.
Yeah.
There's nobody around today that could say, yeah, that was him.
Nor any cross information to verify that
No.
it's him or not,
No.
or a description of what he looked like.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, do we have any history of what type of man he was? What was he into, or anything about him?
Not a whole lot, because once he came to Texas, we know what he did most of the time, where he went, what he did. But before that, I'm guessing he was fairly educated, because I'm not saying like college educated, but you know,
Right.
he wasn't like a lot of people of his day that couldn't read or write or anything like that, because there are a lot of I recently ran across a lot of documents that have his signature on them,
Okay.
but until very recently, I'd only seen one document that had his signature. But he could read and write. He was involved in a lot of things where he had to know what he was doing. So he was fairly educated man, I think.
So brings up a good question. He homesteaded here. He basically claimed a lot of land. And so if you have enough land, you can just create your own town? How does that
Mhm.
work?
That's a long, long story how that came about. Let's back up a little bit, Jay.
Okay.
As far as we know, well, let me get back to what I was going to read you here,
Okay.
and because this is from Thelma Rogers Cook's history,
Okay.
and what she says. Let me get, yeah. Let me make sure I can read it.
Yeah. I just keep them on all the time. I don't even play no more.
These are just readers. I don't have prescription. But I'm gonna read you two paragraphs out.
Okay,
I mean,
yes, sir.
she's got about 10, 12, 15 pages here, but I'll read you two paragraphs. She says, James Maynard was born November 17th, 1804 in North Carolina. Shortly thereafter, his family moved to Murfreesboro, Rutherford County, Tennessee, and there he knew Samuel Houston. In 1832, Sam Houston was commissioned by President Jackson to negotiate treaties with Indian tribes in Texas, and James Maynard was one of the men he selected to accompany him on his mission. We know nothing of the childhood of James Maynard, but from his penmanship and records of his business transactions during his lifetime, it's apparent he was educated above average for the times. And then she says, James Maynard remained away from his family for 3 years, and in 1835, he returned to Tennessee for them. In 1836, James Maynard brought his wife and two small daughters back to Texas, along with other family members, including a brother, Joseph J. Maynard, and Joseph's wife, Caroline, and a sister, Rhoda Maynard. It's quite possible that there were other members of James Maynard's family to accompany them, but these are the only ones she's been able to trace so far. Now, all of that, 90% of it may not be true.
Oh, 90% of that may not be true.
Yeah.
And why is that?
Well, she says he came to Texas in 1832 with Sam Houston. There's nothing that verifies that. Nothing supports it. Nothing confirms it. In fact, there's a lot of information that contradicts it.
Don't stop there. You just going to keep us in suspense.
I have no doubt that James Maynard did know Sam Houston,
Okay.
because back in Tennessee in the early 1820s, Sam Houston was appointed as Some places say Major General, some places say Adjutant General of the Tennessee Militia.
Okay.
About 1825, James Manor joined the Tennessee Militia, and so he was a member of the Tennessee Militia. So they may have met there. But there's further records that say that Sam Houston said he knew the Manor family back in Tennessee. But the thing that says that James Manor came to Texas in 1832 with Sam Houston and stayed for 3 years and went back home in 1835, there's nothing at all that confirms that anywhere. In fact, the history of Sam Houston says from 1829 to 1832, he was living in Indian Territory in Arkansas.
Okay.
Because he had made friends back when he was about 16 years old. He had gone to live with Indian tribe, with an Indian chief in Tennessee, and he made friends with this Indian chief. And then when the Indians were moved out of the territory and into the Oklahoma and Arkansas area, well, Sam Houston had a very bad an affair with his young wife that he had married, and it upset him so much that he resigned his position as governor of Tennessee and moved to Arkansas and lived with the Indian tribes for 3 more years. And then it says in his history, and I've looked at pages and pages and pages of Sam Houston's history, and they all say that he left the Arkansas Territory and came into Texas in December of 1832.
Okay.
So he didn't come from Tennessee to Texas with James Manor. But James Manor's history says that he came to Texas with Sam Houston, stayed till 1835, and went home, and brought his family back the next year.
Okay.
There are documents at the Texas General Land Office where James Manor says he came to Texas in 1837 by himself, without his family. When he applied for his first land grant, that's the way it was done. They were given land. The government, part of it was from the Republic of Texas, part of it was from like Bastrop County. That's where he got his first one, from the Bastrop County Board of Land Commissioners. He got 640 acres.
Wow.
In order to get that 640 acres, he had to swear that he came to Texas in April of 1837 as a single man. His family wasn't with him. So if he didn't come to Texas until 1837, all that part about him coming to Texas with Sam Houston in 1832 is probably not correct. And the other thing that backs that up is that, probably about 6 months ago, I don't know whether you've ever heard of it or not, but it's very similar to Ancestry.com. It's a service called Family Search.
Okay.
It's done by the Mormon Church, and it's free. You don't have to pay for it like you do Ancestry. So it's free. But about 6 months ago, Family Search started what they call an experimental project on their website. And one of the things you could never do before that, you could search through typewritten documents, but you could not search handwritten documents.
Okay.
But when they started that, they started this new program that will search handwritten documents also. Well, as soon as I discovered that, I started looking through it to see if there was anything at all and it covers a wide variety of topics and places. I started looking to see if there was anything at all that I could find about James Manor. I found about 10 or 12 different deed records showing that James Manor was living in Yazoo County, Mississippi from 1831 to 1836.
Wow.
And I've got records of all of that stuff.
Wow.
So if he was living in Yazoo County, Mississippi from 1831 to 1836, then he wasn't in Tennessee coming to Texas with Sam Houston in 1832.
True.
And the deed records not only mention James Manor, but the very first deed record mentions James Manor and his brother William Lee Manor, who bought a lot in a brand new town it was called Manchester, Mississippi. Then it's Yazoo City, Mississippi now,
Okay.
but it was named Manchester when they first established it in 1831. Him and his brother went half-seas on this lot in this brand new town. And then 2 months later, his brother sold his portion to James Manor and moved on. But most of those deed records mention not only James Manor, but his brother, and they mention his wife. And there can't be more than one James Manor and a wife named Phoebe Manor who lived during that time period and had a brother named William. It's got to be the same family.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So, but all those records show that he lived in Yazoo County, Mississippi from 1831 to 1836. And then I think, and there's never going to be any way to prove it, but I think in February of 1836, he sold all of his property. He sold his land, he sold his house, he sold his farm utensils, he sold it says all the corn and fodder that's on the land at the time, and it says he sold 14 slaves at that time and moved. I think what he did was take his family back to Tennessee. Then he came to Texas, and that's why the 1837 record says he came as a single man. He came to Texas in 1837 by himself. And there's another reason he came to Texas in 1837. He already had a brother-in-law living here.
A brother-in-law?
A brother-in-law,
Okay.
a man named John L. Lynch, had married James Manor's sister, Elizabeth,
Okay.
a few years earlier. And John L. Lynch came to Texas in 1835. And I think James Manor probably followed him because they both served in the military. They were called ranging companies, but they're usually just referred to as Texas Rangers.
Okay.
But both of them served in the same military in 1837 and 38, and partially in 1839. They were both in the military at the same time. They were mainly protecting settlers against Indians. It was their main function. But they did all that. And so I think one of the reasons James Manor came to Texas in 1837 was because his brother-in-law was already here and told him, what was going on. And he said, well, I'm come check it out myself and find out what's going on.
Wow. So since Lynch was his brother-in-law, that means he came to Texas with his wife and wasn't able to take advantage of the land grab like Mr.
No.
Manor did.
You would think that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
No, he came to Texas. He by himself. Lynch came by himself. His wife and family stayed in Tennessee. They never came to Texas.
I guess you can't sit up here and find out if you actually married or have a wife somewhere else. So.
The reason they never
Okay.
came to Texas is because on December 25th, 1839, James Lynch was killed by Comanche Indians.
Wow.
So his family never joined him in Texas.
Wow.
James Manor, when he was killed, there was a guy named James Smith who applied to be the administrator of Lynch's estate because Lynch was a friend of his and a business partner, and Smith applied to be the administrator of James Manor's estate. I mean, of Lynch's estate.
Mm-hmm.
And when James Manor heard it, he objected. He went to the court and he said, I object to James Smith being appointed because I am a direct descendant of John Lynch. And so I'm better suited to handle it. The court agreed, and James Manor was appointed the administrator of Lynch's estate. He served in that capacity for a little over a year, from 1840 to 1841. And then that was the exact same time that he was building his two-story house here in Manor. So I think he said, I've done enough of it. I'm going to get out and let somebody else finish it up.
Wow.
But I think that John L. Lynch was one of the reasons James Manor came to Texas also.
Okay. Wow. Well, I tell you what, that's some good investigation you did. Because I mean, we have written history and nobody's going to rebuke it because we don't know. But
Nobody
just
can.
digging a little bit deeper, you actually get to the truth. Well, I'm going to shift gears for a second. What drives you as a historian, and what drives you to sit up here and dig and find more about it?
Well, once you start looking, it's hard to stop.
Yeah, you start going down that rabbit hole.
No, the reason I got started on it a number of years back, like I said, my family moved to this area in 1952.
Mm-hmm.
And over the years, different pieces of, my parents bought 51.53 acres of land out Lake Manor Road out here. And after my father died and some of the land was divided up between different members of the family. And I got to looking at surveys when we'd made surveys of the new pieces of land. And every one of those surveys said it was a part of the Gordon C. Jennings estate. And I got to looking, I think, who in the world is Gordon Jennings? So I started looking, find out who Gordon Jennings was. Gordon Jennings was the oldest man to die in the Battle of the Alamo.
Really?
Yeah. And the land that I live on now was given to his heirs because of his service in the Battle of the Alamo. But that kind of got me started. But then I also had an aunt who passed away in San Angelo in 2007, and she had requested several years earlier that I perform her funeral service for her. She had nobody else. Her husband was dead. All the other members of her family had passed away. She was my father's youngest sister, and she had no one else. So I went to San Angelo and performed the funeral service for her. And then, because she had no one else, I stayed on 3 more days and cleaned out her house.
Okay.
She saved everything from the early 1900s
Wow.
up until then, everything related to the family.
Mm-hmm.
And previously, she had written a family history.
Okay.
So I've got all of that. I brought a truckload of stuff back from San Angelo and got to looking through all that stuff. And I saw so much about family history and so much about my family history that I just sort of naturally got into looking. And once I started looking, I couldn't stop, sort of.
And so from there, you and digging into your history, which started intertwining with the history of Manor,
Exactly.
you just kept going down that hole.
Exactly.
Okay, understand.
Yep. Because my family has been out there that close to Manor since 1952.
Mm-hmm.
And once I started looking at Gordon Jennings' property, I kept looking at this guy's property and this guy's property, and and just got deeper and deeper into Manor. I never intended for any of that to happen. It just did.
You became the official historian for the whole city.
That's what I'm told. Yeah.
That's pretty good. That's really good. It's funny how we find out our calling. I'm glad you're doing it, though. Definitely glad you're doing it. Next question I have is, so I guess the next question you already talked about, because my question was, you discovered some new documents that contradict the long-held beliefs about Manor's history. Oh, so you already shared that. So I guess you didn't blow that question out the water. If the information of the historical marker at City Hall is incorrect, what should be changed, and how does that process work?
Well, that historical marker says that James Manor came to Texas in 1832 with Sam Houston, stayed for 3 years, and went home in 1835. So if this other information is true, and I don't see any reason why it's not at this point.
Right.
I don't think there's any way to change it. That would mean that historical marker is incorrect when it says that.
So how would, let me formulate this question. You have contradicting information backed up with documentation.
Right.
Who do you have to go to appeal a historical belief? Is it? Because that's basically what it is, a belief, because nobody really knows.
Yeah.
How do you do that? What's the process of that?
Well, I don't know. As far as the historical marker is concerned, there's a certain person and a certain group in Texas Historical Commission and all that handles that sort of thing. But I haven't looked into it deep enough to find out exactly what you'd have to do to get one corrected.
So you would have to do it from a state level, not necessarily from town.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
the city doesn't have anything to do with it.
City of Manor wouldn't have anything to do with it. No.
Do you think there would be resistance from going with this instead of, because it sounds really good that he came here with Sam Houston. That's big.
Yeah.
And to say no, that's not what he did. He just caught the Greyhound and showed up in town. That doesn't sound as romantic.
I agree. It does sound good, and I don't, like I said, I don't doubt that Sam Houston and the Manor family knew each other back in
Right.
Tennessee, and the fact in Thelma Rogers Cook's history, she says that Sam Houston stayed at James Manor's house a number of times when he was in this area. I have no reason to doubt that. It could very well have been, but I don't think the part about him coming here with Sam Houston in 1832 was correct. But probably that I think you're probably right when you say they would be resistant to changing.
Especially this long.
That may be one reason I haven't done anything with it yet.
Yeah, you probably feel it. Like, yeah. So let's say we do change it. Does it really have that much of a effect on us
No,
and our history?
no, not really.
Okay.
Because most of the important stuff is what James Manor did after he got here.
Okay.
Not when did he come. or who did he come with, or what year did he come. Most of the stuff involving him is what happened after he got here.
Well, let's get into what happened after he got here, because that's interesting. So once he finally got here, tell us the story.
Okay, like I said, the document says he came in April of 1837,
Okay.
and that was when he applied for his first land grant of 640 acres. He got that one from the Bastrop County Board of Land Commissioners.
Right.
That was in May of 1837. So
Okay.
he had just gotten here, because if he came in April, he applied for that grant in May. Then in July, he applied for another land grant from the Republic of Texas for 1,280 acres,
Wow.
and he received that also.
Wow.
And both of those were surveyed next to each other, right here where we're sitting. And so he had 1,920 acres within a few months after he arrived, because the surveys for both of those properties were made in 1838. So he hadn't been here but a year or so when he already owned over 1,900 acres of land. And that's when when he first came, he didn't own any, of course he didn't own any land when he first came in 1837. He stayed or settled temporarily at Weber's Prairie, which is now Weberville.
Okay.
It was called Weber's Prairie at that time because it was started by a man named John Ferdinand Weber, who settled there and eventually had to leave town because he was married to a black woman, and other people didn't put up with that back in that day and time.
Huh.
But so he ended up moving to South Texas and sold all that somewhere everybody else. But James Manor and probably his brother Joseph John Manor first lived at Weber's Prairie for a while, and then James Manor built a log cabin on his land here off of Gilliland Creek. He built a log cabin in, they say, 1838, and that may be correct, I don't know, but he built a log cabin, and I think probably that was also the same time he was serving in the ranging company, or as Texas Rangers, 1837, 1838, 1839. He was also serving in those. In fact, there was one battle in 1839, a battle with some, I believe it was Comanche Indians on the San Saba River. James Manor was wounded and had to be carried home. So there were 6 people that got wounded, and he was one of them, and they had to carry him home. But apparently he recovered okay. But then he built the log cabin here about that same time. And then in either 1841 or 1842, or maybe both of those, he built a 2-story house.
Okay.
And they say that he kept the log cabin as the kitchen for the house, but he built the 2-story house. And I think that's probably about the time he moved his family to Texas from Tennessee.
Wow. Okay. So rumors have been going around that those little wooden shacks behind the Lions Club were his homestead, right?
Yes.
What do you say about that?
Well, that is correct. James Manor, most people who own land in this part of Texas would file a deed record claiming a certain portion of their land as their homestead. That means that it could not be sold or given away without another deed record, But James Manor claimed about 200 acres right here as his official homestead, and those shacks that you're talking about, plus his 2-story house and the log cabin, were all on that 200 acres of his land.
Okay.
But that was just in the middle of his 1,920 acres,
Right.
So, but only 200 was filed as his homestead, and that was a common practice. A lot of people did that. But as far as we know, that was his house for a number of years. In fact, one thing we haven't gotten into yet is that James Manor was married 3 times.
Oh, okay. Well.
His first wife, Phoebe, he married in 1824, long before he came to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So he married Phoebe, and they came to Texas he came 1837. She probably came 1840 or so, and but she passed away in 1859, and she's buried in Rector Cemetery. I don't know whether you've.
Where is that located?
Just a little bit north of the Shadow Glen Golf Club.
Okay.
It's just right up back up a hill, just a little bit from Shadow Glen Golf Club. Phoebe Manor is buried there because at that time there probably weren't any other cemeteries around.
Okay.
So she passed away in 1859. James Manor married again in 1866. He married a woman named Missouri C. Parker Burdett.
Wow.
She was the widow of Neil Walton Burdett, who had died at the age of 36. So she inherited a lot of land and livestock and things from that marriage. But then when James Manor married her, all that they didn't combine their different ones. They 2 days before their wedding, they filed an official record in the Travis County record books, saying that if everything that she brought into the marriage was hers separately, everything he brought into the marriage was his separately.
Oh, so that was an early time prenup.
Yep, sort of was. Yep, exactly.
Okay.
So, but they
Okay.
did that, and so he married Missouri Burdett in 1866.
Mm-hmm.
I still haven't found anything that says exactly when she died or where she was buried, but we do know from deed records that she sold part of her land in 1872, and in 1874, a man named W.H. Reynolds was appointed as administrator of her estate. So she was dead by 1874.
Wow.
Well, James Manor had a number of daughters that he had to raise, and he probably, as a single man, he might not have been the best person to do all that. So in 1875, he married again to a woman who had already been married and widowed twice.
Wow.
Her name was Elizabeth Ann Stell Fox Allen Davis Manor by the time she got married to him.
Wow.
So he married her in 1875, and then James Manor, of course, died in 1881, and about 9 months later, Elizabeth Ann married a guy named M.C. Abrams, Marion Cortland Abrams, who had been a boarder in James Manor's house at the time that he died. Back up 2 points here. When James Manor married Elizabeth Ann, James Manor was 75, she was 35.
Wow.
When Elizabeth Ann married M.C. Abrams, she was right at 40 and he was 26.
Wow.
So those things didn't make a whole lot of difference back then, apparently.
Apparently not.
But anyway, she married, the point of that is she married Marion Cortland Abrams, and the two of them, M.C. Abrams and Elizabeth Ann, lived in James Manor's house until they both died in 1941.
Okay.
So after that, the house and the property passed to the two daughters that James Manor had with Elizabeth Ann. They had two daughters during their marriage. One was Lucille and one was Elizabeth. And so all the property passed to them, and they ended up selling it all because neither one of them lived here anymore. So they ended up selling it all.
Okay. So did James Manor get buried in the same cemetery as his first wife?
No. In 1871, James Manor donated 5 acres of his property, and the deed record says he donated it to the trustees of the church on Wilbarger's Creek.
Okay.
But it's the Manor Cemetery now. So he's buried in the Manor Cemetery.
Okay.
But there used to be a church building right there at that location also. But at some point it was torn down. Yeah. But that's where James Manor is. But none of the rest of his family is there.
Wow. That's that. I'm right now. I'm just awed by so much information you have. And you have dates and names. It's like I barely can keep up with my own name, and you have so many names. And there's a lot of interesting stuff. Is it a lot of well, I doubt if it would be because it's personal life, but a lot of like to have 3 wives back then, and then you die, and your wife marries a guy that's staying with you. That sounds like soap opera stuff.
It sort of does, but that's what happened. Because
Wow.
the 1880 census lists M.C. Abrams as a boarder in James Manor's house. And then he died in 1881. So that's how they knew each other, how Elizabeth Ann and M.C. Abrams knew each other, because he was living as a boarder in James Manor's house.
So earlier you was telling me about that area where his 2-story house was, and you said they just recently was removing rubble and everything from that area.
Probably about the middle of last year.
Okay.
Yeah, I first started looking at that about 2 or 3 years ago. So
Mhm.
so I've got a few hundred pictures, photographs that I took of the place, of all those smaller buildings, plus all the rubble of the house and everything else out there. I took hundreds and hundreds of pictures of those, and I'm glad I did now because the rubble is all gone. I don't know exactly who removed it. I know it was done in connection with a study that was done for, I think it was done for Pete Dwyer, who owns all that land out there now.
Okay.
A developer who owns all that land. I think it was done in connection with something he wanted done. But then, and I have a lot of documents that were sent to me concerning that by the company, by the firm that did the study. And but the house, the rubble was all the ground was scraped clean, and all the timbers from the original house. Like I said earlier, the house just collapsed on itself after a while. And it may have been because it was a two-story house and it had this tall brick chimney on one end of it. It may be that the board started giving away and the chimney fell over into it and collapsed the house.
Okay.
But the only thing of the house that's left now is part of the chimney. Part of it's been scavenged. It's not all there anymore. Some scavengers came through and carried off parts of it. But part of the chimney, and there was a brick lined cistern behind the house,
Okay.
a water cistern. That's still there. And then there's a smaller one out behind where the house was, a smaller one that may have been, I don't know exactly what it was, whether it was a cistern or water well, maybe, I don't know. But it's brick lined also. They dug a hole and then they lined the outsides of the hole with bricks.
Okay.
And both of those are still there. And plus the four, there originally were 5 outbuildings there, but when they started building the new road, one of them went away. Yeah, but it was just a kind of a little pen of some kind. It wasn't really I mean, it had a tin roof over it, but it wasn't actually a building like the others. But the other 4 buildings are still there. And a study has been done of all that property a couple of years ago, and by people who know what they're looking at and who know what they're talking about. And they say maybe 1 or 2 of those buildings were there during James Maynard's time, but not all of them. There's a couple of them that definitely are newer than that.
Okay. So you were talking earlier about he received grants for 19,000 acres.
1900.
1900. Why would he wasn't a farmer. He said he was pretty much a Texas Ranger.
Well, that was just for those few years, 37, 38, and 39. After that, he
became a farmer?
Yes, farmer,
Okay.
and he raised livestock.
Okay.
He had herds of cattle also.
Okay. Because it's like, why would you need so much land if you're not actually working the land?
Yeah.
And to apply for the grants, it was to be able to work the land.
Yes, and that 1,920 acres was just a small part of the land he owned over the years. From the time he got here until the time he died, he bought and sold a lot of property.
So something I asked you earlier. So how much land do you need to own to be able to start your own town and have it named after?
Well, the way this town happened
Right.
was all about the railroad.
Okay, let's get into that.
Let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
Around in the early 1850s, people in Austin began to talk about, we need a railroad going from Austin to Houston. They began talking about it, I think it was 1851, and they began planning. They've been trying to get things done, and not much happened for quite a few years. They appointed committees to check into things, but then a number of years later, along about close to 1858, the railroad had already been built from Houston to Brenham.
Okay.
So they were looking to get the railroad extended from Brenham on into Austin. And in 1858, there was a man who was employed by the railroad company. It was a Houston and Texas Central Railroad, and Houston and Texas Central Railway Company was the official name.
Okay.
But they had this guy whose name was E.S. Wertz, W-E-R-T-Z, who surveyed a path for the railroad coming from Brenham into Austin, and it would go right straight through Weberville.
Okay.
And that's the way they were planning. He surveyed it and said it would be a little over 82 miles that way. That was the plan. That's what they started building the railroad, but they didn't actually get started building it until after the Civil War was over, because when the Civil War hit, that just put a stop to everything for a while.
Right.
So after the Civil War was over, they started building the railroad again. And they got as far as about into the Weberville area. They were that far by 1869. In July of 1869, there was probably the most disastrous flood ever on the Colorado River. It washed out many farms, many fences, many buildings. It washed out all the railroad that had been built in that area. James Manor was appointed one of the committees or one of the groups of men to negotiate with the railroad. And when this flood wiped out everything they had already built, James Manor got with the people of the railroad and said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a strip of land 200 feet wide through all of my property if you want to build a railroad there instead. And they said, we'll do it, because they changed course. The railroad eventually was supposed to go through Weberville, and they changed course and became a little bit further north and then on into Austin in order to get away from the Colorado River.
Oh,
So he said, I'll give you a strip of land 200 feet wide all the way through my property, all the way through the 1,280 acre land grant. And so they started building the railroad. And then he signed a property deed giving 200 acres of land to the trustees of the Houston and Texas Central Railroad. They had a man, an engineer that was employed by the railroad. His name was Theodore Koss, Kosse, Theodore Koss. He came to that 200 acres and surveyed and mapped out the town of Manor.
wow. So, but it was not a town of Manor. He just surveyed basically the land that he
It was
owned.
200 acres of open land.
And that's when it became the city of Manor.
That became the town of Manor. At first, once the railroad was built and the land was all mapped out, at first it was just simply known for a while as Manor Station, because
Okay.
it was a station on the Houston and Texas Central Railroad. It was just called Manor Station. And then in some records, you'll find it called the Village of Manor. And then eventually it's the town of Manor, and now it's the city of Manor.
Okay.
So, but he donated, I mean, he actually deeded that 200 acres to the trustees of the railroad. They mapped it out and planned it, and actually the original plat map that he made is at the Austin History Center now.
Wow.
They don't know where they got it from, but I do. It originally was in the deed records, Travis County deed records.
Mm-hmm.
It was in deed record V, page 796. It was pasted in there. It was pasted in, and at some point it came unglued,
Okay.
and it ended up at the Austin History Center, and so they have it now. But after the town was surveyed and mapped out and everything was done, 2 more property deeds were made out in, this would have been January of 1872.
Okay.
2 more property deeds were made out. They surveyed that land and mapped it out. They came up with 80 blocks that came out to a little more than 800 lots when they surveyed it. And when these 2 more property deeds gave half of those blocks and lots to the railroad and the other half to James Manor. And that's the way it started out. And immediately James Manor started selling lots in this new town, and that's how it got started.
Wow. 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 So, man, I don't even know what to ask next. Wow, it's so much. Hold on. I want to check the phone, see if there's any comments. I don't want to miss anybody commenting on the show. Let's see. Okay. No. So no comments. So tell us something else about. Yes, thank you, Kevin. Tell us something else about the beginnings of the town. Like you was telling me earlier about the banks coming in and things like that. Like, what were some of the first businesses that moved into town?
There was a man named John Gill Wheeler.
Okay.
Started one of the first stores in this area, and for a long time before, this would have been around probably 1868, 1869, he built a store in this area, and for a long time, the area was simply known as Wheeler's Store. This was before there was a town of Manor. Everybody, if you said you were going to Wheeler's Store, everybody knew where you were going.
Right. And everything started right around the railroad tracks?
No, the railroad tracks weren't here until 1871,
Okay.
1872. There were just a different number of people that settled in this area. Once James Manor had his property, other people came in, and he sold off, say, 200 acres to this person or 300 acres to that other person, and so they started settling in this area. But they were just people who were living here. There was no town until 1872.
Okay. So the water tower,
Yeah,
that didn't come until after 1872 when
I
people
think.
started coming in and after the railroad, correct?
Yeah, I think the water tower was actually built in 1935.
Oh, okay.
So it's fairly new
Oh, yeah,
compared to some of it.
relatively, right?
Yeah.
Well, I am totally lost here. First time I'm hearing a lot of this stuff. So from that point, and now you have the Weber store,
Wheeler store.
Wheeler store.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? And the town growing.
Well, there were different people that came in and opened businesses, but it really didn't, as far as businesses or anything growing, it didn't happen until the town of Manor was mapped out and he started selling lots to people. Then once he started selling, those people would open businesses on what they called at that time, it was Main Street in
Okay.
Manor. It's now Parsons or Old Highway 20.
Is that I seen a picture of Main Street Manor in black and white. Is
Yeah,
that the one
yeah,
you're talking about?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
Okay.
about. Yeah, there's 2 or 3 different pictures that are all the same, but yeah, the same kind of thing.
So who was James Manor the first mayor of Manor?
No, there was no mayor at that time.
Okay.
Yeah, that didn't come until many years later.
Okay, after he died.
Yeah,
Okay. So who was the first mayor of Manor?
I don't know. I've tried to trace it down, and
Okay.
I've been able to trace back several different mayors, but as far as who might have been first,
Okay.
I don't really know.
And you talked about actual law enforcement here. You said that the area probably would have been patrolled by the Travis County Sheriff.
It would have been for a while, yeah, because there's another story that we'll get into some other time.
Okay.
But yeah, because there's back around 1905, the Travis County Sheriff was named George Matthews, and I've got a letter that he wrote to a Dr. Stroberg who opened a hospital in Manor in 1905,
Okay.
and was Dr. Stroberg was being threatened by people in the area that if he didn't get out of town, they were going to kill him.
Wow.
And so he turned it over to the sheriff, and the sheriff wrote him a letter, and I've got that letter. In fact, I've got both letters. I've got the one. I've got the one that the people wrote. They didn't sign their names to it, but I've got the one that they wrote threatening him, and the sheriff's response to it.
Well, we definitely going to do that on another show.
Yeah,
Because I want
well, that's a whole different show about the hospital. So that's a whole nother show. Yeah.
What else interesting we should know? Because I don't even know where else to go from here.
Well, let's see. A lot of the early history, the reason Manor became what it did in its early days was because of the road that came from Austin. Here's the way it was done in those days. As I said, there were different people who settled in this area before there was the town of Manor. And when they got a number of people in this area, they wanted a road going from Austin to Manor and on to Brenham. Some of the records say from Austin to Brenham, and some of them say from Austin to Brenham and Caldwell. And so they wanted a road. Well, the way it was done was several of the residents in the area, the people who owned the farms and all, would get together. They would go to the Travis County Commissioner's Court. They would file a petition and say, we would like to have a road built in certain areas. Travis County Commissioner's Court would then appoint 3 or 4 of the landowners in that area to map out that road and bring their findings back to the court. And if they got it approved, then the people who lived in that area were responsible for making the road.
Okay.
And in 1849, James Manor and about 4 or 5 other people presented a petition to the Travis County Commissioner's Court and said, we'd like to have a road going from Austin to Brenham. Well, and when the court approved it, and they said, okay, James Manor, you're in charge. And the way they always said it was, they'd list the name of the landowner, and then they would say, and the hands working on your property. In other words, the
Oh,
slaves,
okay.
the people that are working for you, it always meant the slaves. All those people who are working for you, they are responsible for building the road. So they'd have to cut the trees and clear the land and make the road. Some places you could go through. Some people didn't mind you going through their property. Others would say, no, you've got to go around. And that's where a lot of the curves and turns were made in the road.
Oh.
But along about early 1850s,
Mm-hmm.
they got the road going from Austin to Brenham. And eventually the road was divided into 3 different sections with 3 different people responsible for each section. But James Manor was always responsible for the part of the road going from Gilliland's Creek to the eastern Travis County line. So he was always in charge of making sure that was taken care of, him and the hands on his property. Well, when the railroad laid out the new town of Manor, it just so happened that the new road ran right in front of James Manor's house and right through the middle of the new town of Manor.
Huh.
What a coincidence, right?
Yeah. You got the road on one side and the railroad on the other.
No, yeah,
Wow, he planned that
both of
pretty
those.
good.
That's what I said. He wasn't a dummy. He knew what he was doing. But he had
Okay.
had the railroad going through his town, and he had the main road going from Austin to Houston going through his town. That's one of the reasons it lasted. Where there were a lot of other small towns that grew up that died. They didn't last.
Well, that's an interesting point. So basically, the road and the railroad kept Manor alive, but why didn't it expand further than it did? Because you think that it would have been a pretty big hub in this area.
Yeah, there were a number of different reasons. One of them had to do with the decline of the cotton market in the area. You know,
Okay.
For many, many years, the big crop at Manor was cotton.
Okay.
In fact, I can tell you that when my family first moved to Manor, this place you're sitting right now was a cotton field.
Okay.
But cotton was the big crop, and I forget what year it was now, but the boll weevil came in and just destroyed the
Oh.
cotton crops for a number of years, and everything started to die down. And then after a while, when Austin started growing and getting bigger, a lot of people from Manor moved into Austin because they wanted a bigger, better place, and so Manor just got smaller and smaller. When my family moved to Manor in 1952, the official population, United States Census population, was 766, and that's about the smallest I've ever seen. But in early 2000, it started growing again.
Okay. And the sad thing is growing, but it's not because of the highway or the train. It's because you can't stay in Austin.
Yeah, yep. Now a lot of people want to live outside of Austin. So
Yes.
yeah,
I think it's interesting that 290 has been a part of Manor's history for so long, and that slaves actually built 290.
well, not necessarily 290.
Cleared
There-
the lands for the road to be built.
Well,
right?
there were there are 3 different roads that had to do with Manor. The first one was the Austin to Brenham Road. That one, 99% of it doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
It ran, well, out there where the James Manor property is, where those 4 little buildings and the house was, it ran right in front of James Manor's house. And I
Oh.
mean right in front of his house.
Okay.
And it came through the middle of the town of Manor, I think probably on Eggleston Street, and went out the other side. But then that was in the early 1850s when that road was built. Then around 1920, the early 1920s, they replaced it with Old Highway 20, with what's now Old Highway 20. It was the Highway 20. They built it instead, and instead of going right in front of James Manor's house, it runs right where it runs today.
Okay.
It still runs through Manor, but the original road did not run down Parsons or down what they called Main Street. But then in the early 1920s, they replaced the original road with Highway 20. Then in the early 1950s, they replaced Highway 20 with 290.
Oh, okay. Wow. Wow. It would help if I was from this area.
It might.
Yeah, because I am a transplant. I'm from Texas, but I'm not from this area.
Yeah.
I'm from Beaumont. So it'd probably been a lot better for me if it was Beaumont history. This is like totally new. But like I was telling you earlier, I feel like I'm your audience with so many transplants from other places coming here. Like they probably just as clueless as I am.
Yeah.
about it because I'm still having a hard time just remembering the streets. And now you talk about old streets that's replacing other old streets that's replacing other old, and I'm just totally lost. But it's fun. I am enjoying this so much, learning so much about where I'm at right now. That way I can start passing this down to the next generation. So now I can become part of Maine history.
Well, hopefully at some point there's going to be a library, a new library in Manor, where they can
word.
set up a history section because I have, let's say, tons of stuff that I'm planning to donate to it.
That's what I heard.
I've got lots of stuff that I want to donate, but it's going to take somebody who knows what they're doing to lay it out and display it so that it makes sense to people. But yeah, I've got all kinds of stuff that people have given to me.
What's the most interesting thing you have?
Probably the stuff about the hospital.
Okay. That must be a really good story.
It is. It's good, but it only lasted for 15 years. The hospital was built in 1905 and it burned down in 1920. So
Man, Maine has had a problem with fires.
yeah, they have.
So when did they start collecting property tax in Maine?
Oh, it was way back. I don't know as far as the city of Manor. I don't know, but there were tax records. You can find tax records online that go way back to the middle 1800s. I mean,
Okay.
1850, 18, some areas around that way. But it was nothing compared to taxes for today. And at that time, the people were even taxed on the number of slaves they had
Wow.
because they were considered to be property, So they were taxed according to, and the tax assessment records. I've got some from Bastrop and I've got some from Travis County that had to do with James Manor, and some of them showed that the taxes on slaves were just between certain years, certain ages. I mean, between the age of 5 years and the age of 60 years. Anybody on the outside of those, they weren't taxed on those, but that they were even taxed as property.
Okay. Anything else interesting about James Manor you want to talk about?
Oh, I don't know. Let me think. I'm sure there's some things we're leaving out that. Yeah, I'll tell you one. If James Manor had been allowed to do what he intended to do when he first came here,
Okay.
there might not have ever been a town of Manors right here.
Speak more. What was the original plan?
As I said earlier, James Manor says he came to Texas in April of 1837. In May of 1837, he bought a certificate that another man had been given for I forget how many acres now. It may have been 640, but I don't remember. But James Manor bought a certificate. The guy had been given the land grant, but he had never had it surveyed. And this was kind of a common practice between some people. They would get a certificate for a land grant, but then they didn't survey the land and settle on it. They would end up selling their certificate to somebody else. James Manor came here in April 1837. In May of 1837, he bought a certificate from another man for 1,476 acres. And the other man that he bought it from had just previously purchased it. James Manor bought it from John O'Brien. John O'Brien had just previously purchased it from John W. Johnson. John W. Johnson was the original man who got the land grant. He sold his certificate for his land grant to John O'Brien. James Manor, very shortly after, a month or so, bought the certificate from John O'Brien. What happened was John W. Johnson, the original owner of the certificate, even though he didn't own it anymore, he went out and had the land surveyed for himself. And if he had not done that, James Manor would have been allowed to survey the land. But James Manor did not get clear possession of that land until about 1852, 1853, because he had to take the guy to court in Houston to get his land.
Okay.
So he was not able to survey any land and settle on it because of that first land grant, first piece of property. So when he bought that property, he had just come from Mississippi probably, and the last piece of land he sold in Mississippi before he moved Well, that was what I was telling you. He sold his land, which
Mhm.
was quite a few acres. It's really hard to figure how many acres, but he sold all of his land. He sold his house and his possessions and everything, and slaves. He sold all of that for $30,000, which is a lot of money then.
Yes.
In 1836, $30,000 is a lot of money. But he sold all that for $30,000. So when he came to Texas, he had money to buy land.
Okay.
So he as soon as he got here, he bought that 400, what he thought he was buying 1,476 acres of land. It didn't turn out that way because the underhanded dealings of John W. Johnson, that James Manor couldn't survey that land. If he had bought that, there's no telling where he would have surveyed it, because he didn't have any other land at that time. He didn't have his land grants here at that time, so he may have surveyed it who knows where, and there may not have ever been a town of Manor.
Wow. Railroad and road could have been somewhere totally different. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. It was a pleasure talking with you. Um, this is not the last time we're going to talk with you.
Well, that's
'cause
good.
next time, I would really like to talk about the house on the main road, the orange one, the historical house,
Blue House.
the blue house. I would like to talk about that and the history of that house. And also, I think we're just going to have an episode just about this hospital.
I agree with that.
It sounds really interesting. Now I'm gonna ask this one last question, and it's gonna be History Channel style because I don't know why the History Channel has gone this direction. But are there any haunted places in Manor?
I've never
That you
heard.
know?
I've never heard of any.
yeah, I don't think there's anything left to be
Yeah,
haunted.
yeah, I don't think so either. There wouldn't be, because the only buildings that have been around for a long time are the ones like in that row where Manor Grocery and Ramos Cafe was, and
Right.
that row right there. Those buildings, according to Travis County Appraisal District, those were all built somewhere around 1900. So
Oh,
those
wow.
are going to be some of the older buildings in Manor, plus the Bloor House, like I told you earlier, was built in 1897. So it's been there since 1897. But it and those buildings and the two banks, the Guarantee State Bank that was built in 1913, and the Farmers State Bank that was built in 1916, somewhere around there.
Okay.
Those are about the oldest buildings of any significance that are around.
So that little dry cleaner right on the corner, what was that originally?
I have no idea.
Okay.
There's been a number of things there over the years, but I don't know what it. There was a row of bit. Well, it may, now that you say that, it may have been part of the Baldridge drugstore.
Okay.
There was a guy named what was his name? I forget what his first name was, but his last name was Baldridge.
Okay.
He opened a drugstore, and I know it was right in that area. I have a photograph somewhere of a flood in Manor. That whole street right there in that intersection is completely flooded, and it shows a brick building right there on that corner. And I'm thinking it was part of the Baldridge drugstore.
How many times has Manor flooded?
Not many.
Oh, it's had more fires than floods.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Okay.
There was one fire in the early 1900s, 1906, I think it was, but the two big ones were in 1930 and 1932,
Right.
and they burned a lot of buildings in downtown Manor.
And he told me a story about the 1932 fire. And the first thing I said, oh, was it a wildfire? He says, no, it was a guy. You want to tell that story real quick?
Well, there were two different black families in Manor that opened little cafes
Hmm.
right in the same area. And according to the investigation that was done after the fire, one of the owners of one of the cafes set fire to the other guy's cafe in order to burn him out because they didn't want the competition.
Oh, man. So I hope the taco stand don't go and try to burn out Chuck's. That's great. I mean, it's enough for everybody to eat, but man, that's dastardly. And then it wasn't just that stand; it ended up burning a lot more businesses.
Yeah, there were other businesses that caught fire
Man,
and burned at the same time. Yeah.
man. All right. Like I told you, he had some great stories. It was a pleasure talking
Certainly.
with you, sitting here with you.
Anytime.
Yes, sir. We're going to get you back in here. We're going to talk about some more Manor history. And if you want to know more about Manor's history, join us. If you want to know more about the things that's going on in Manor, next week I will have the mayor in for our monthly discussion. And if you just want to do more in Manor, I don't know who you need to talk to, but there's people out there you can talk to. Go down to City Hall. There's people that you could talk to, and they'll love to see you and welcome you in with open arms. Um, if you want to help me, just watch, just tune in. I will do my best to try to bring in interesting people to talk to you about things that's going on in Manor. I hope to continue this, and I enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy it too. There's a million videos out there that you could be watching. You chose to watch this one, and we appreciate you. And until next time, peace.